Robert Ripley, famed cartoonist, died at age 55 in New York of a heart attack. His name is synonymous with the wonders and oddities he made famous, with his trademark phrase,
"Believe it or not."
He was the son of pioneer parents. His career took him from small-town California to big-time New York, and then to more than 200 countries around the world. Already a millionaire in the Depression, he was always an innovator. Movies, radio, exhibitions, and early television. Living extravagantly, he enjoyed three, lavish homes, and his personal Chinese junk. And he especially enjoyed the company of many women. Whoa. Foxes. He made at least one law, got more mail than anyone in the world, and was voted the most popular man in America. He went almost everywhere, saw almost everything, and brought back a great deal of it. Wow. Though he is gone, his legend lives on. And here he was buried with his parents, Lily Bell and Isaac. You were really something special, man. I wish I could have met you.
Well, my young friend, you're about to get your wish.
Well, that just about does it, Mr. Ripley. If my school project is half as incredible as your life, I'll get an A for sure. One more shot. Buddy, I'm trying to get a shot here. Mr. Ripley?
Believe it or not.
Not.
Be careful what you ask for. You just might get it.
You're dead. What are you doing here?
Unbelievable things happen in this wonderful world.
Not this unbelievable.
December 25th will be my 100th birthday.
Yeah, I know. I'm doing a video report.
Homework? I love homework. Young man, I can give you a report that will astound and amaze your classmates. Believe it or not, they've given me a little time back here. So I suggest you come with me.
With you?
Cast caution to the wind, my friend, and come with me.
Where?
To a place of unlimited opportunities.
And how's that gonna happen?
I got here, didn't I?
You have a point. Whoa, what's going on here?
Pretty amazing, don't you think?
This is real. I mean, you're real.
Believe it or not.
No, I don't. Well, maybe I do. This is awesome.
That won't work here, Thomas. You can't take pictures back with you.
I can't take pictures back with me, but I want to use this for my video report.
Use your eyes and your ears, my friend. Listen and learn.
Wow. You must have been one of the greatest cartoonists that ever lived.
I like that title.
Did you, like, go to art school or something?
No. For as long as I could remember, I drew things. That's how I expressed myself best, drawing. Actually, Thomas, I was a very shy person.
You? You were shy? Robert L. Ripley, the greatest showman on earth?
My kind of kid. Thomas, do you know what this is?
Yeah, it's a drum.
No, it's a gong. An Asian temple gong. It was used to frighten away evil spirits. I used it to open each installment of my television program. I'll show you what I mean. You do the honors.
Gladly.
Presenting Robert L. Believe It or Not Ripley, the famous, fearless father of fathomless features, follies, and fantasies.
On Christmas Day, 1893, in the sleepy California town of Santa Rosa, Isaac and Lily Ripley received the greatest of all gifts, their firstborn child. An auspicious beginning for a man destined to dazzle the world with wonder and his own unique brand of curiosity. His name, Leroy Ripley. In his lifetime, Ripley became known as the modern Marco Polo, scouring the globe for his trademark Believe It or Not. Travel, it seems, was in his blood.
My parents were part of America's great westward migration. My mother, Lily, was actually born in a covered wagon on the fabled Santa Fe Trail. My father left home at age 14 to seek his fortune in California. When he got to the Ohio River and realized he couldn't afford the ferry ticket, he jumped in and swam across. Wanderlust and a sense of adventure. This was my inheritance.
As a student, the 3 R's took a back seat to the 2 D's, daydreaming and doodling. But Ripley was lucky. Teachers spotted real talent in his idle sketches.
I was encouraged to draw my homework. In no time at all, I was a top-notch student and the new illustrator for the Porcupine, the school newspaper.
In 1905, the death of his father forced Ripley to help provide for his family. He took a job as a gravestone polisher. In true Ripley fashion, he later turned this dreary experience into a source of humor for his Believe-It-or-Nots.
Here lies Lester Moore, 4 slugs from a 44. No less, no more.
Here lies an atheist, all dressed up and no place to go.
Here lies F.K., who lived 26 years as a man, 37 as a husband.
Here lies John Yeast. Pardon me for not rising.
Here lies the body of Jonathan Blake, stepped on the gas instead of the brake.
Here lies the body of Margaret Bent. She kicked up her heels and away she went.
Ripley went from polishing off gravestones to something a bit more upbeat, dusting off hitters. On the Sandlot Diamonds of Santa Rosa, Robert Ripley was a sparkling young prospect. He had big plans on making America's favorite pastime a full-time deal.
By the time I was 13, I was playing semi-pro ball, striking out players twice my age. I was young and strong with a wicked curveball. I had my heart set on the big leagues. I thought it was a sure thing.
On one fateful day, a broken arm shattered Ripley's big-time dreams. It's moments like this that often send lives spinning out of control. But for young Ripley, destiny was calling. Forced to hang up his spikes, he simply picked up his pen and hit his drawing pad hard.
I was always looking for an extra buck, anything to help out. I was able to add to my small salary as a baseball player by designing the team's posters. With baseball out of the picture, I let my imagination run wild. Cartoons and drawings poured off my pad.
Ripley's widowed mother was doing her best to make it during hard times. She took on boarders to help provide for Robert and his younger brother and sister. One of her tenants, impressed with Ripley's work, showed them to a friend, the editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. The editor, upon seeing some of his baseball drawings, promptly hired him on the spot as the paper's new sports artist.
I was not yet out of my teens, and here I was in the most exciting business in the world, newspapers.
The Chronicle was a dream job for the talented Ripley. He handled deadlines and celebrity with equal dexterity, becoming a fixture on the San Francisco print scene. The renowned Bay Area wordsmith, Jack London, took young Ripley under his wing.
He told me I was underpaid, said I should demand more money. I went in and asked for a $2.50 a week raise, and they fired me.
The ambitious cartoonist tucked his drawing board under his arm and set his sights on a bigger target, New York City. For any newspaper man or woman, the Big Apple was the big time. It was 1913, and New York boasted 14 different daily newspapers. This was the major leagues Ripley had always dreamed about.
When I got to New York, I made the rounds, shopping my work all over town. I wasn't exactly an instant success, but I knew there had to be someone willing to take a chance on a hungry kid with ink on his hands. I was right. The editor of the New York Globe liked what he saw and hired me as their new sports illustrator. Here I was, in the greatest city in the world, with the job of my dreams. Covering sports for the Globe, I went everywhere and did everything. Horse races, the World Series, boxing matches, you name it. I was there, front row and center.
The posh New York Athletic Club became Ripley's new home, with its elegant social gatherings, sporting environment, and high-tech equipment. It was the place to be for a young bachelor. He soon made a name for himself, becoming the club handball champion and illustrator for their magazine. Ripley dove headfirst into the glamour and excitement of New York nightlife. He became a snappy dresser, two-tone shoes, loud colors, and bow ties. His friend Bugs Bear would later describe him as a paint factory hit by lightning. Ripley was creating a new character for himself. Even his name, Leroy, came under scrutiny.
My editor said, Leroy's no name for a sports writer, so I changed it to Robert.
His transformation was almost complete. All that was left was one small incident that would change the course of his life forever.
One day, I was working on a deadline and I had nothing. I was facing a blank page and time was running out. I was desperate. I went to my files and pulled out a number of sports oddities I had collected. They were just strange little facts and anecdotes I thought were funny and interesting. J. Darby of England jumped backwards 12 feet 11 inches with weights. H. Hillman and Lawson Robertson did 100 yards in 11 seconds in a three-legged race. R.P. Williams made a running high kick of 10 feet 3 inches.
Ripley drew up 9 of these oddities. He called it Champs and Chumps, but just before handing it over, he changed it to Believe It or Not. The response to his last-minute column was overwhelming. He had touched a nerve, and New Yorkers clamored for more. Robert Ripley was on his way to becoming the most celebrated cartoonist in the history of journalism. Bob Clark, a Mad Magazine cartoonist for the last 30 years, worked as an assistant for Ripley when he was 17 years old.
Ripley had a style that was completely unique. I mean, I don't think anybody else or any other cartoonist had anything like that. His ability to draw figures in motion and his knowledge of anatomy was just unbelievable. I used to just look at his stuff in awe. It was just so beautifully done.
And Ripley's stories were equally unique.
Rocky Stone of Boston knocked himself out. He KO'd himself with an uppercut that glanced off his opponent. During a bullfight in Bayonne, Spain, the bull wrenched loose the matador's sword and pierced the heart of a spectator. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died within minutes of each other on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the day they joined our founding fathers in signing the Declaration of Independence. Crazed with grief, Juana La Loca would not leave her dead husband. She carried the corpse with her for 4 years.
Ripley's column was the hottest thing in New York newspapers. All of Gotham turned to his page for the strange, the weird, and the incredible. He found himself busier than
the original one-arm paper hanger.
This was a perfect Believe It or Not. It was bizarre, it was true, and it caught people's attention.
Max Schuster, the president of Simon & Schuster, wanted to publish a book of Believe It or Nots. I told him I was just a 5-cent man. That was the price of a newspaper. He dogged me until I finally gave in. I'll tell you, that book took off like nothing ever before. It went to 4 pressings in the first month. In 6 months, it sold over 500,000 copies. It outsold every other book of its time. That book itself was a Believe It or Not.
This is excellent. Did you make a lot of money on this book?
Indirectly. William Randolph Hearst. You know who that was?
Of course. He was the Rosebud dude. He was like a zillionaire newspaper publisher.
Well, yes, he was quite wealthy. He read my book and told his people to sign me at all cost. They paid me over $100,000 a year.
A year? That's a lot of money, especially for back then.
And back then, a very nice car cost $850.
No way!
So I guess today, I'd be a zillionaire? Now, what could I do with $1 zillion? Well, if $1 zillion $1 bills were laid end to end...
Mr. Ripley, you have a strange way of looking at things.
Say, would you believe a man that smokes a pipe with his eye?
Not.
Live and learn, my boy. Watch.
Ah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You got a headache?
Yeah.
You should go to a doctor.
I just went to a shrink.
Careful with him.
It's not real, is it?
It most certainly is. It came in the mail with a note saying, "Please take care of this. I think it's one of my relatives."
You, have stuff from all over the world, huh?
I found this in New Guinea. It's a ceremonial ancestor mask used to conjure up deceased relatives.
You've been to New Guinea? Man, I've always wanted to go there. There in Australia, you know? Throw another shrimp on the barbie, mate.
I've been there.
Well, you just chilled around the world.
Chilled?
Yeah, you know, chilled, relaxed, had fun.
I did more than that, Thomas. I followed reports of wonders, human and non-human oddities. I found oysters growing on trees in Cuba, a barking bird in Chile, trekked through deserts and jungles, reporting on the wondrous, the improbable. And travel, Thomas, was not, as you say, chilled. It was hard work.
Well, leaving us so soon, Mr. Ripley. Yes, I'm sorry. I have a long journey ahead of me.
Ripley's column was the talk of the town. To keep them talking, he packed his bags and hit the road. On December 2nd, 1923, he embarked on his first trip around the world. It was only the beginning for a man destined to become the modern-day Marco Polo.
Goodbye, everybody.
Whenever Ripley traveled, it was big news. On his early adventures, he not only sent back drawings of exotic places, he wrote a travel column describing the wonders of the world for his readers. He was a cartoonist correspondent, posting bylines from Tokyo to Calcutta, from Jerusalem to Paris.
There are few automobiles in Japan, but there are many good drivers. The Japanese taxi driver uses only one speed, faster. The train was in the Agra station, and when we raised the blinds, we saw the most beautiful building in the world, the Taj Mahal. French girls are clever and pretty. More clever than pretty, I think.
For Ripley, the world was a movable feast, a sumptuous banquet of exotica for a man with the most eccentric appetite. He traversed the continents like a great white hunter, bagging not game, but believe it or nots. These he found in abundance at every port of call.
In India, I saw a man lift heavy weights using only the suction created by his eyeballs. I saw a beggar who had not sat down for more than 10 years, and a devout religious man who had stared at the sun without blinking for 15 years.
No matter where he went, no matter how he got there, Ripley found amazement and wonder waiting for him around every corner. From an Indian who pierced his tongue with sharpened bicycle spokes, to a wasp-waisted man from Fiji, where a small belt size was considered attractive because wives had to feed their husbands. The breadth and scope of Ripley's curiosity was endless. Exotic locations and alien cultures came to life for his captive audience, most of whom would never travel west of the Hudson, let alone the Ganges or the Nile.
In Cairo, I heard tales of a grand sharif who rode to worship on the bodies of his parishioners, most of whom were no worse for wear. The injured were considered properly punished sinners. I found a convicted criminal in Africa sentenced to wear a wooden yoke around his neck for the rest of his life.
The oddities of both Mother Nature and man received equal billing on Ripley's drawing pad.
I danced on the floating islands of Lake Victoria, masses of land that literally drifted from place to place on this beautiful lake. I found a Chinese farmer named Wang whose head was adorned with a horn more than a foot long. Truly one of the strangest human beings I have ever seen. I saw a man who was never in the dark. He had a hole on the top of his head where he put a lit candle. He was a human lantern.
Robert Ripley echoed the innocent curiosity of his readers. The world, seen through his eyes, was a constant marvel. Reporters and newspapers would welcome their favorite journeyman back from his travels with headlines, stories, and interviews.
How amazing. But have you any news that might entertain the women, Mr. Ripley?
Why, yes.
Back in New York, Ripley picked up where he left off, and entertaining women was always first on his list. With his best friend, humorist Bugs Bear, these two fashion hounds were the toast of the town. Life for Robert L. Ripley was good, but it was about to get a whole lot better.
One day in 1928, a man approached me in the lobby of the New York Athletic Club. It was Joseph Connolly, the powerful head of King Features Syndicate, the largest newspaper group in the world. He had in his possession a telegram from his boss, William Randolph Hearst Sr. The telegram had only 2 words on it. Sign Ripley.
Ripley signed. In no time at all, his salary went from a respectable $10,000 to the astronomical sum of $500,000 a year. By 1929, a time when millionaires were jumping out of windows, Ripley had become the first millionaire cartoonist. With the Hearst publishing empire behind him, Ripley's feature soon appeared in over 300 U.S. newspapers and in 17 languages in 38 different countries. The entire world fell for his strange cartoons of the bizarre, the grotesque, and the weird. Ripley and Believe It or Not became household words. At its peak, a survey in the United States showed that it topped every feature in reader interest with the single exception of first-page news. Phrases like, "That's one for Ripley," and "Tell it to Ripley" passed into everyday language. The demand for more and more oddities kept Ripley on the go, crossing datelines, deserts, and oceans on a regular basis. And it wasn't always smooth sailing. Ripley reported on the Temple of Broken Dishes, where hundreds of thousands of shattered tableware recovered from a shipwreck were used to decorate a Buddhist temple in Thailand. He brought back pictures of an African postman who filed not only letters, but his teeth. When he smiled, many people got the point. In India, it was the Temple of 81 Sinful Positions. In Peru, the throne of the Inca. Korea boasted a huge tomb built to honor all that was left of a beloved queen, her little finger. And after visiting a small town in Norway, Ripley could honestly say he'd been to hell and back. He traveled to over 200 different countries and had good things to say about all of them. All except Stalinist Russia in the 1930s. He incurred the wrath of the communists by recording his unfavorable impressions of this workers' utopia.
Russia is a gigantic poorhouse where millions of people are on the verge of starvation at this moment. Moscow and Leningrad are showplaces, and fake shows at that, where the traveler is led about under a smokescreen of propaganda and allowed to see only what they want him to see and nothing else.
It was the only country he ever got kicked out of. No matter how much he traveled, no matter how many oddities he could find, the demand for more was always there. Ripley called upon his readers to help out. Contests were promoted, offering prizes for the most interesting Believe It or Nots. His faithful followers were up to the task.
Dear Mr. Ripley, I've used the same 6 hairpins for 50 years.
Dear Believe It or Not, my wife and I have been married for over 60 years. We have 5 children, 18 grandchildren, and 19 great-grandchildren, and 14 in-laws. In over 83 years, no one has ever died.
Dear Mr. Ripley, I can play 3 clarinets at the same time.
In one contest, first prize was a Curtiss Wright monoplane, complete with flying lessons. We received more than 1.5 million entries.
The winner was Clinton W. Bloom of Brooklyn, New York. In 1918, returning from France, his troop ship was torpedoed and sunk by a German U-boat. A year later, while working as a lifeguard at Manhattan Beach, a wave washed up his Navy regulation scrub brush lost when his ship went down. 3,000 miles later, it had miraculously returned to its owner. Believe it or not. The response we received from these contests was incredible. We had Mrs. Earl Palmer, who beat all odds and survived a cut to her jugular vein, and A.E. Rump, who has been unable to move any part of his body except his mouth and eyes for 23 years. Yet he conducts a business and earns a living for 3 people.
From a funny-face contest winner to a blind golfer, people were dying to become a Believe It or Not.
Stanton Walker attended a ball game while seated between 2 friends when one handed an open pocket knife to the other. As the knife passed in front of Walker, it was struck by a foul ball and driven into his heart, killing him. And in another do-or-die situation, City Marshal W.W. Pittman won a trip to Cuba for this submission. He killed a Mexican bandit by shooting a bullet into the muzzle of the bad man's gun.
With millions of Believe It or Nots pouring through his mail slot, Ripley would never again face a blank page.
Hey, what was this all about? Ripley, world-famous traveler, creator of the Believe It or Not cartoons, is rambling again. This time below the equator. Why was that news?
Well, I think it made the news because people were so desperate for escape.
Escape?
Diversion. That was during the Great Depression. Things were so bad, people wanted to get away from their troubles. My cartoons helped them escape for a little while. You could buy a newspaper for a nickel and read about a river of vinegar, or a barking bird.
Or oysters that grew on trees.
Or a monkey so small it could fit inside a teaspoon.
Oh, I'd like to see that.
A lot of people said that, and I wanted to show it to them.
Well, how'd you do that?
People far and wide could see my oddities with a great new invention. Talking pictures. Opened up a whole new world.
Wait, you mean you actually have pictures of that guy that ate the live mice?
Indeed I do.
Oh, that's gross. But I'd like to see it.
Believe it or not.
great, man.
I shot scores of short subjects for star-studded studios like Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox.
Well, you sure shot a lot of strange stuff.
Stranger than you think. This is a mummified head of a Haverel Indian from Ecuador. At one time, this head was the size of yours and mine. Kurt Thompson of Erie, Illinois is blind, but has operated a switchboard which he has never seen for 25 years. And, believe it or not, he has never given a wrong number. Snake charmers in India eke out a precarious existence, enticing reptiles from their lairs. Now this, my boy, is a true one of a kind. A timeless wonder. A marvel. Witness the great Masakichi.
It looks so real.
It should.
It should? I don't get it.
Well, when Masakichi learned he was dying, he decided to recreate himself. So he made this statue, using his own fingernails, toenails, hair, placing each one on the statue exactly where it had been on his own body.
Now this is way beyond strange.
In my travels, I heard about many things. The Masakichi statue was the most intriguing. I searched all over the world for it. Can you guess where I found it?
No.
In a shop in San Francisco. But the owner wouldn't sell it to me.
Why?
He said it was the only reason people came in.
So what'd you do?
I bought the whole shop. I had to have it.
In a believe it or not footnote, Masakichi also pulled out his teeth. Then two things went wrong. His girlfriend didn't want the statue, and he recovered from his illness. He spent the rest of his life eating soft foods, bemoaning his twisted fate.
I will now draw a picture of a Spanish lady, Senora Salomea Wolf, who had her husband's portrait tattooed on her tongue.
With an endless supply of believe it or nots, the Ripley juggernaut was up and running. He had conquered newspapers, topped the bestseller list. What next? Movies.
I took many unusual pictures with this camera. I'll show you some of the films.
In 1930, Warner Brothers signed Ripley to a $350,000 contract for a series of short films featuring his famous believe it or nots.
Friends, we are fortunate this evening in having with us one of the world's greatest travelers, Mr. Robert Ripley, of Believe It or Not fame.
Gone with the wind, they weren't. And with his overbite and stiff delivery, nobody ever mistook Robert Ripley for Clark Gable.
Tonight, I'm going to take you on a little trip across the country that I took recently.
None of that mattered. His believe it or nots carried the whole show. From the mysteries of the ancient pyramids to houses in Ohio made out of giant wine casks, Americans were enthralled with Ripley's cinematic magic.
The country was locked in the Depression. I think people were happy to lose themselves in exotic locations or celebrate the unique individuals we found right here at home, like the one-armed boat builder or the man with no arms who played the trombone with his feet.
Here's the largest edition of the biggest-selling book in the world, the Holy Bible.
Nothing was too big or too small to escape Ripley's scrutiny. He found a hard-working Missouri man 119 years young, and a boy from Chicago 6 years old. Little Jackie Jones had a face full of whiskers, the strength of a full-grown man, and smoked big black cigars. Talk about a misspent youth.
And now I'm going to shock you.
Ripley was honing his technique, always looking for what he called shockers, statements that couldn't possibly be true.
The People versus Robert Ripley.
In his most memorable Vitaphone film, he places himself on trial to defend two of his most controversial Believe It or Nots.
Proceed, Mr. District Attorney. You have made the preposterous declaration that Colonel Lindbergh was the 67th man to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. That's true, I repeat that. Lindbergh was the 67th...
Ripley actually had the gall to challenge Charles Lindbergh, America's #1 hero. His first solo flight across the Atlantic was cheered the world over as a feat of unsurpassed courage. To question this achievement was pure sacrilege.
Explain, please. You've forgotten Alcock and Brown, the first two to fly the ocean, and then there were the two dirigibles. One had 31 men aboard, and the other one had 33, making 66 people who had flown over the ocean before Lindbergh did.
He had them on a technicality, and he loved it.
I make a living out of the fact that truth is stranger than fiction. Yet I would venture to say that I have been called a liar more than anybody else in the world. When I am called a liar by a reader of my cartoons, I feel flattered. That short, ugly little word is like music to my ears.
Even a lie detector failed to catch Mr. Believe It or Not. Music was the subject of his greatest all-time shocker, one which caused a public protest of unbelievable Ripley-esque proportions.
Do you realize you stated that the United States has no national anthem? Our country has no national anthem and never did have one. What about the...
To add insult to injury, Ripley further enraged all good Americans with this zinger.
As a matter of fact, it's taken from the tune of an old English drinking song. I have brought my witnesses along. Listen, and you can hear it sung.
In hand, where we sat in full glee, a few songs of harmony spent of the
The public outcry was phenomenal, but as always, Ripley was on solid ground. Congress had turned down the Star-Spangled Banner 6 times to be our national anthem. His greatest shocker spurred the American people to send 5 million petitions on to Washington, D.C., demanding their favorite song be legally recognized. In 1931, the U.S. Congress obliged. Robert Ripley, the ex-ball player from Santa Rosa, had helped change history with a cartoon.
Ripley, believe it or not, you are acquitted.
Good morning, Mr. Ripley.
Good morning.
I read in the paper where you received more mail than any other man in the world.
The combination of Ripley's shockers and even more contests had U.S. postal workers humpbacked and bow-legged under the weight of their sacks. And it was mail only the creator of Believe It or Not could receive.
Here are a few curious letters that I've received from all parts of the world. This one is written in shorthand. Another one written in the Morse code.
In 1931, the incredible volume of bizarre mail sent to Ripley prompted Postmaster General Walter F. Brown to issue the following edict.
Such letters hereafter will be either returned to the sender or to the dead letter office. Postal clerks have had to devote too much time recently to deciphering freak letters intended for Ripley.
This one is not Greek. And this one is written in the language of the deaf and dumb. This one is written in the Naval Code of Play.
Ripley was delighted by the tons of mail sent his way. Answering it was another story. At one point, he had over 1 million unopened letters waiting for him up in his attic. He developed the peculiar habit of taking mail with him on trips and responding from far-flung locations. People were often surprised to find a letter from Ripley postmarked Cambodia or Pakistan lying in their mailbox. Once, while flying over French West Africa, he took a bundle of unanswered mail and threw it out of the plane. Wandering nomads found the packet and turned it in to authorities. When Ripley finally got back home, he found the same pile of mail sitting on his desk. In his lifetime, Robert Ripley received more mail than anyone else in history, including the big guy up north. And he even had something to say about him.
Santa Claus really lived. He was the Bishop of Myra who died in 342 A.D. St. Nick was not only the patron saint of children, but of thieves and pawnbrokers too.
This one is addressed with a tear in the envelope and a picture of Lee. Ripley.
Ripley had become the P.T. Barnum of the odd and unusual, a shrewd promoter always looking for new venues to push his offbeat product. He found one at the Chicago World's Fair in 1933. He opened up what he called his auditorium, a place where people could come see, live and in person, bizarre believe-it-or-nots they had only read about. Ripley was hot, and he had the Midas touch. Over 2.5 million curiosity seekers poured through the doors to see his fantastic tales of pen and ink become flesh and blood.
For some, the blood rushed right out of their heads. People were passing out at the rate of 100 a day. I had to have 6 beds and a nurse on hand to deal with these faint of heart.
Ripley was celebrating the quirks and eccentricities of everyday people, not making fun of them. Men and women who led normal lives but found themselves with unique talents, like Charlie the Rubberman Roman, or Ed Hayes, a Ripley favorite. He was billed as the anatomical wonder, able to dislocate his abdomen and seemingly devour his own stomach. Then there was Joe Lorello, one of Ripley's all-time strangest human oddities. He was born with a twisted spine which allowed him to turn his head completely around his body. Most times, it was hard to tell if Joe was coming or going.
Even I was surprised by the success of my auditoriums. They kept me constantly busy. I made sure that each one was first rate. I scoured the globe for my oddities.
Wow. Must have been some freak show, huh?
Not freaks, Thomas. Human oddities, curiosities, wonders. I never allowed people to use that word around me.
I'm sorry. But what's wrong with the word freak?
Well, it's all in how you look at it, isn't it?
Well, what about the guy that ate the live mice? I mean...
I assume he was hungry. That's right, Thomas. Nature's wonders, curiosities, the unbelievable, they can all be very funny.
I see what you mean. Well, Mr. Ripley, please, indulge us with one of your fascinating magical journeys.
I was deep in the jungle, searching for the crawling tree. The wind was howling as we crossed a vast river. Suddenly, there it was, the legend I had been tracking.
The crawling tree.
Moving effortlessly, smoothly across the river.
You're kidding.
Absolutely not. It was growing on the back of an alligator.
Did you actually see this with your own eyes?
You sound like Wayne Harbor.
Wayne who?
Wayne Harbor, the man who challenged everything I did.
In the incredible life of Robert Ripley, Mr. Wayne Harbor of Bedford, Iowa, deserves special mention. Harbor was obsessed with trying to disprove Ripley's Believe It or Nots. For 26 years, he sent out letters to people featured in the cartoon asking for verification. His method of addressing these letters was unique. Wayne would simply clip a Believe It or Not out of his local paper, paste it on the front of an envelope, and drop it in the mail. He sent over 25,000 inquiries and received 13,000 replies. Like this one, from a woman who had grown a potato with a man's face on it.
Dear Sir, you asked me if the comparison was actually so. Yes, and even more so as you can see by the enclosed picture of the potato taken by the Valley Daily News. The two girls on the right are my daughters.
Or one from a Texas man who kicked a cigar up onto a crossbeam.
Well, I'd been trying to quit smoking cigars. I carried it in my mouth and I chewed on the end. Anyway, this cigar came so soggy, I kicked it, more of a huff. Well, it landed on a beam about 18 or 19 feet up to the ceiling. That's about it. By the way, I'm not as fat as Ripley drew me.
How about an unusual adoption?
Dear Mr. Harbor, Snow is now 3 years old. We raise her in our home and she is so cute. We paid $12,500 for her, a record price for an albino chimp. Thanks for your interest.
Ironically, Wayne Harbor challenged Ripley so many times that he himself was featured in 7 different Believe It or Nots.
He wrote me a letter a day challenging my Believe It or Nots.
I guess he wasn't one of your favorite people, was he?
On the contrary. I never minded when people called me a liar. I loved proving them wrong.
Did this Wayne Harbor guy ever prove you wrong?
Never. As a matter of fact, he made me more popular.
Robert Ripley was ready to take his next step up in the world of entertainment, but once again, the reluctant superstar had to be convinced. Doug Storer, a successful radio producer, wanted to build a show around Ripley and his oddities. Hazel Storer, Doug's wife and script supervisor, recalls the circumstances.
So he telephoned Ripley in London and asked Ripley if he would do it. And Rip said yes. He said, but I'm not good at talking, which he's true, he never was. So Doug said, you don't have to talk. He said, all we do is introduce it with a couple of lines. He said, and the actors take over from then on, and the narrator will take over. And that's what happened.
And here is that incomparable, inimitable, illimitable, inestimable introducer of immeasurable, incalculable, incredible impossibilities. Believe it or not, Bob Ripley.
True to form, Ripley's show was a huge success. America believed in Believe It or Not. So much so that people were happy to sit around a radio and hear the world's tallest man described to them.
Well, I got a man right here in the studio who can make Primo Carnera look like a midget. This man towers 8 feet 7 inches in the stratosphere. And here he is, the tallest man who ever lived, Robert Wadlow.
Oh, they were really wonderful. They were marvelous. The great days of radio, they were all live and people stumbling all around half the time.
Not content to stay home and stumble around a studio, Ripley took his show on the road and pioneered a new technique, the live remote broadcast.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the program tonight. This is Bob Ripley speaking to you from the deck of the most astounding marine, believe it or not, in the world, the Marine Studios in Marineland, Florida, 18 miles south of St. Augustine. And in just a moment, I shall descend under the water and give you a radio ear view of the most fantastic sight I have ever seen. And at the same time, I hope to settle that age-old question, can a man and a man-eating shark get along peacefully together? Well, this question has worried me for a long time. So I'm going down to the ocean bottom and attempt to feed the sharks, feed them with fish, I hope, instead of myself. As I stand here, I know I must look like the man from Mars.
Ripley was constantly trying to top himself. His show was becoming its own Believe It or Not. He was the first to transmit a show from the middle of the ocean, the first ever to broadcast to every nation in the world simultaneously. He used a corps of translators to accomplish this remarkable feat. And who else but Robert Ripley would try and interview a parachutist in midair?
Jack Gilbert's ready to jump now, and believe me, he has a man-sized jaw tonight. Jack has made many jumps before, but he's never had one weighted down with a 20-pound transmitter on his chest. All right, I can see him now. Yes, there he comes in the doorway of his plane, standing out there. The lights are coming on. Jack Gilbert stepping out on the wing, and there he goes. Okay, Jack Gilbert, take it away.
Some of Ripley's radio stunts worked better than others.
And to that, all I can say is, believe it or not.
From the bottom of the canyon, he will present Believe It or Not, that will amaze you.
Ripley's live show from the bottom of the Grand Canyon was one of his more dramatic radio firsts.
Believe it or not, Bob Ripley. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Grand Canyon. This is Bob Ripley speaking to you 1 mile down at the bottom of the canyon. And have you any idea how deep that is? Well, just imagine 5 Empire State Buildings placed one on top of the other, and even then, they would not reach the top.
For the first time in the history of radio, he will present a man broadcasting the sensations of actually shooting the rapids of the vicious and terrifying Colorado River.
Their guide for this death-defying bit was a young outdoorsman named Barry Goldwater. Goldwater, who would later steer a path through politics, gave people a first-hand account of guiding a raft through the rapids.
Take it away, Barry Goldwater.
Our plans were upset a bit today because the river has risen a good foot and a half since our estimates of yesterday. We got to get this water out of this boat. Emily, we got to come into a landing here pretty soon now. Which one of these places are we going to take? We got a little picture here of the river going down to this little sandy place. Emily, don't try that right side. Emily, don't. Here, no, his oar slipped out. Take it, Bob, take it. I got to help him with this oar. We can't go any longer. Take it away.
Barry, Anthony. Well, I can only say this is the most thrilling thing I've ever looked at in years and years of travel and radio.
With stunts like these, Ripley's radio show posted the highest ratings. In 1940, Believe It or Not was described by Radio Guide as consistently the most interesting and thrilling program on the air. This is all the more incredible considering how hard it was to get Ripley up to a microphone.
Ripley was a man of great courage, and probably the hardest thing he ever did was speaking in public. Somebody would always have to be encouraging him. And then he would go out, and then he would do a pretty good job.
Are you nervous, Bob? Oh, am I nervous? With every snake in here is poisonous, and there's more than 500 of them.
He hid his fear well, even broadcasting a show live from a snake pit.
But I've never seen a man handle snakes like Ross Allen does. It will be necessary for me to go in that pit myself.
There we were. Hundreds of poisonous snakes writhing at our feet. Death all around us. Ross and I were in the middle of the pit. And suddenly, the lights went out.
What'd you do?
Ross grabbed me and said, "Run!"
It was fun every day because we seemed to always be on the air. We always seemed to have programs. We were always doing something. And it was just fun. We just loved it.
The most spectacular show Ripley broadcast concerned the most unusual pedestrian ever to walk the sidewalks of New York.
And in just a few minutes, you will hear as an eyewitness a description of the most famous of all the miracles of the East. I have brought from India a firewalker, Kuda Buck, who will tonight actually walk barefoot over a bed of flaming red-hot coals. Directly across the street from Radio City, where I'm now standing, a pit has been dug 25 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet deep. Since early this morning, a fire has been burning in that pit, a fire that has now reached its hottest point and is now a flaming bed of hot coals. Take it away, Graham McNamee. It is almost impossible to come within 4 or 5 feet of this terrible fire without being so scorched that you would be unable to move. In the enclosure are several hundred guests this evening, a dozen or more physicians. An ambulance is in attendance, and also several nurses. About 85 newsreel men and cameramen and newspaper reporters are here. The fire shows a temperature of about 1,200 degrees within a foot of its surface. Have you finished your examination, doctor? And what would you say are the conditions?
See, in a very normal condition, soft and normal, free from blemish, no signs of injury of any kind.
Are you ready, Kudabat?
Yes, Mr. Ripley, I'm ready.
He has said his prayers, and here he comes.
We were worried because he's wearing this gown, and Douglas kept saying to him, "You've got to pull that skirt up, you know," because it's billowing around with the flames.
There he goes, one step after the other. Yeah. Another one, he made it, he's over, Graham.
And he walked through it, and he got out, and one of the cameramen from Pathé or some news company said, "We didn't see it, we didn't get it all, Cooter, can you do it again?" This is unbelievable, this is true. And he did, the guy went through it again.
He's going to do it again, ladies and gentlemen. There he goes, feet are in the fire, he made it again. All right, okay, stop this. Listen to the doctor. Listen to the doctor say.
After the second performance of this remarkable stunt, the attending physicians re-examined Cooter's feet and found them to be unharmed.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is truly the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Because that fire was so hot that none of us could get within 7 feet of it. Yet he walked through it as easily as you would stroll down Fifth Avenue on a Sunday afternoon. Believe it or not.
You know, you were a really magical guy. No wonder you received so many letters.
Millions. It seemed like something for me.
Here's one. Dear Mr. Ripley, I am sending 3 of my pictures. There's one of me lifting a 12-pound hammer by my nose. Ow. I've lifted as much as 25 pounds that way.
Dear Mr. Ripley, I was born with the 3 legs. 2 I use for walking and standing, and the 3rd I use as a chair.
Dear Mr. Ripley, here's a picture of me swallowing my face.
Dear Mr. Ripley, I made this string ball on my lunch hour. It weighs 850 pounds.
Dear Mr. Ripley, look what I can do. It's an entire dining room set.
Dear Mr. Ripley, I can balance my entire weight with my mouth.
With this specially designed harness, I can lift a 155-pound anvil with my ears.
I can lift one with the skin on my chest. P.S. How do you like my tattoos?
Dear Mr. Ripley, how about this peculiar pose?
Dear Mr. Ripley, these are my real nails.
And so are these.
Dear Mr. Ripley, I have had as many as 50 pins stuck in my body at the same time without causing any pain, and it is no trick.
And no kidding, it's called acupuncture.
Correct.
No, it's a common practice.
Not always, Thomas. It's all in how you look at it.
York, Cairo, Buenos Aires, South America, France. What was your favorite place?
China.
Why?
Well, when I was a young boy, I spent a lot of time with the Chinese families in my neighborhood. They were wonderful people. Gracious, filled with spirit and culture. With the Chinese, I felt accepted.
So of all the places you traveled in the world, China was your favorite?
Yes. Yes, it was.
So you must think America's pretty boring then, huh?
Boring? This great land of ours? Never boring. There was so much to do and see in my own backyard. I bought my own island. Oh, the parties I gave. Not just parties. Galas. Events. One-of-a-kind, glorious times.
And you
You partied in that?
Indeed I did.
In 1934, Ripley paid $85,000 for his own kingdom, a large house on a spit of land in the Long Island Sound. He called it BION, an acronym for Believe It or Not. With an income averaging $1 million a year and an inclination to spend it, Ripley was primed and ready for the good life.
The thing that money gave him were the two things that he wanted. Power or prestige or something, that didn't make any difference to Rip. What he wanted was to live lavishly. He had a potentate's appetite for living, you know.
As appetites go, Ripley's was insatiable. His constant traveling turned him into a prodigious collector. Believe it or nots were not all he brought back. From beer steins to totem poles, BION became a repository for thousands of curiosities. These ancient warriors were lugged back from China to stand guard over Ripley and his party-minded guests.
So we'd give these marvelous barbecues, and they bring in whole animals, you know, whole pigs and so forth, and big sides of beef, and huge long tables, and you have tables set out, and all the liquor you could possibly drink. Some of the people did. But he might ask 100 people. Politicians, he knew a lot of politicians, of course, you know, and writers and newspaper people, of course, lots of newspaper people.
Ever the showman, always the promoter, Ripley used his home and his parties to keep his name and his product in the news. Jack O'Brien, a society columnist during the 30s and 40s, recalls this side of Ripley.
I was fascinated with his fascination for personal publicity of a kind that always did his column good. He loved publicity. He was smart, and he had the party simply to get attention.
BION was Ripley's proudest possession. Nothing delighted him more than to show off its weird wonders to awestruck guests. It was gaudy, it was loud, and incredibly interesting. A perfect reflection of its owner.
Ripley couldn't see a wall that he didn't have to have something on. He was just, that's the way he was. The place was overpowering. I mean, you'd never want to wake up and have breakfast there after a bad night, really.
Ripley himself was a light sleeper, waking up in the pre-dawn hours to work on his sketches. By midday, he'd be done and ready for the games to begin.
He'd say to himself, I'm tired of working, and he didn't want anybody else to work if he wasn't working, so he'd grab us all, we would go down on the lawn and play softball.
BION was Ripley's grown-up playground. Besides the softball games, there was boating, swimming, skating, and general all-around fun. Ripley worked hard, and he played even harder. And the ones he liked to play with most were women. As one of the world's most eligible bachelors, Ripley had no trouble at all surrounding himself with women. At any given time, a half-dozen female house guests could be found at BION, each vying for the famous cartoonist's attention. Bob Clark fondly remembers one of them.
I just recall one occasion going to the bathroom and opening the door, which was very easy to lock, but evidently somebody forgot to do that, and it was, I believe it was Ilona Massey, completely naked, combing her hair with one knee up on a little stool by a vanity, and she just turned to me and said, "Oh, hello there."
Like everything else in Ripley's life, when it came to women, it was the more the merrier. Hazel Storer remembers a night when she and her husband dropped by unannounced.
So he said, come on up, come on up. So we went up to one of the rooms he had upstairs. He had rooms all over the place. And he had 6 women there. He was sitting in this big chair, and they were sitting on the floor. But we were terribly surprised because, now I don't say there was any orgy going on or anything like that. This was just, they were attentively talking and drinking and having a good time.
Ripley was living large and loving every minute. No matter where he went, no matter what he did, he went there and did it with women. Throughout his life, Ripley wined, dined, and romanced thousands of women, but admitted to loving only one.
The great love of his life was a woman we called Okie. Her name was Ross. But Okie was a charming woman.
A Russian immigrant, she captured Ripley's fancy and became his constant companion.
She took over all the running of Ripley's household and everything else. She was a warm, volatile, intelligent, interesting woman. And she went everywhere with him during those years.
Ripley's love turned to tragedy when, in 1940, his precious Okie died of cancer.
He was absolutely distraught. He was really knocked down. And I remember one time we were in Palm Beach with him, and we started talking about Okie. And he's telling us how this was the only love of his life. He said, I really loved that woman. And he was crying all the time he was doing, which I'd never seen him do before. He cried when he spoke about her. He really loved that woman.
There was one other great love in Ripley's life, and it wasn't a woman. It was a country. The modern Marco Polo, like his namesake before him, found everything he was looking for in China.
I saw more in China in 5 minutes than I saw in a year anywhere else. Naturally, I was almost speechless when I walked the Great Wall of China, the only work of man believed to be visible from the moon. Were there anyone there to see it? It contains enough stone to build an 8-foot-high barrier that would circle the earth.
Ripley went to the center of the earth, believed by the Chinese at least, to lie near the Temple of Heaven.
But I was not just standing at the center of the earth. The raised central stone in this altar near the Temple of Prayers for Good Harvests is considered by the Chinese to be the center of the universe.
Ripley was so taken by all things Chinese, he hired Li Ling Ai to teach him the ways of this ancient culture. Her official title was Director of the Far Eastern Department.
Ripley was completely influenced in his love of Chinese and Chinese subjects because it furnished a need in him. The need of mystery, of excitement, titillating excitement, and it also made his mind work.
One night, with his mind working overtime, Ripley dreamed of an endless line of Chinese people marching to infinity. The next morning, he woke and drew it up as a believe it or not.
So his mind began to think of the Chinese. There are more Chinese in this world than any other race, he said. And if you have them 4 abreast, they'll never end marching. So the American public, with this sense of humor, wrote back, if they never got marching, how come they produce so many Chinese? And Ripley's answer was, damn clever, the Chinese.
Ripley bought a palatial duplex apartment in Manhattan and filled it with his collection of Chinese art and artifacts. New York's glitterati would gather in the huge dining room for frequent lavish parties, with the gracious host presiding over his guests in a long Chinese silk robe. When Ripley liked something, he went all out.
Never had any other kind of food except for the barbecue at home but Chinese food. He really even carried it to that. He liked Chinese food.
Bob Whiteman, Ripley's longtime licensing director, recalls his first visit to this Eastern Palace on the west side of Manhattan.
And I pushed the buzzer, and who answers the door but Robert Ripley himself in sort of an Oriental outfit. Huge apartment facing Central Park West. It was on Central Park West, facing the park. And as I remember, when I walked in, he had a long table set up for, it looked like it could be a luncheon or a buffet. A lot of Chinese girls walking around the apartment. The apartment had masks, damask draperies, Chinese artifacts. It almost felt like I was in a museum.
As always, whenever Ripley had a new visitor, he couldn't resist showing off a marvel or two.
And he said, let me show you a couple of things. And there were 2 items that I'll never forget. The first one, he took me over to a table, and there on this sort of a marble top table in a glass case that looked like small rocks. And he said, "You know what those are?" I said, "No." He said, "Those are 2,000-year-old petrified raindrops." And his enthusiasm was like a kid, which I enjoyed. Now he said, "I'm going to show you the greatest, believe it or not, that I have ever found in my entire career."
The second item Ripley showed him was the famous Masakichi statue, which had taken up permanent residence in his New York pad.
Once you start looking at the world in a particular way, Thomas, you begin to see the curious, the odd, and the extraordinary in everything.
What's this?
A Tibetan skull bowl.
Did you say bowl?
Yes. Made from the skull of a monk. Tibetans filled it with blood and wine, which they drank on New Year's Eve.
Must have been some kind of party.
Ripley's childlike enthusiasm reached a new peak with his most outlandish possession, the Manlei, his own personal Chinese junk. Originally owned by a Chinese warlord, Ripley brought it to the U.S. and had it redone to his own unique tastes. Normally a sailing vessel, Captain Ripley stacked the deck with 2 huge diesel engines. A stranger nautical sight was never seen than his supercharged junk. Sails pressed back against the mast, motoring up and down New York Harbor.
But he insisted on having the sails up because it looked better that way. It really didn't look better because it looked silly with the sails going backwards.
Parties on Ripley's odd craft were glorified press junkets, promotional stunts keeping his name in the news.
Thank you very much for the send-off. This is a transcontinental, believe it or not, trip, and I hope to bring back many interesting things for you. Goodbye. Goodbye.
With the advent of World War II, Ripley's globetrotting was severely curtailed, forcing him to stay closer to home. A fierce patriot, Ripley turned his cartoon over to the war effort, relating tales of enemy horrors and singing the praises of our troops.
After more than 2 years of separation in different outfits, Corporal Tom Safer and Corporal Paul Safer, brothers, met in a foxhole during the invasion of Saipan and were pinned down there for 6 days by withering enemy fire. Master Sergeant John Hasbrock was reunited with his wife, a whack corporal, when he found her in a French farmhouse. They had been sent overseas in different outfits 3 days after their wedding, and their reunion happened on their very first anniversary, believe it or not. When Sergeant Robert W. Furling's outfit left North America for Italy, his dog, the battalion mascot, was left behind. But the dog found a way across, and he and the sergeant were reunited.
Ripley collected hundreds of animal believe-it-or-nots, like the dog from New Orleans who insisted on having coffee in bed every morning, or this peculiar pooch who would sleep on the back of a cow, or these pups who came complete with pictures. He found a mouse who drank too much, and a dog, a horse, and a chicken that smoked too much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Robert L. Ripley presents.
Yay! You kept collecting stuff even with all your business interests?
I was fortunate that my passion for collecting the curious was my business.
Wow. So you had like your own empire.
Comic books, auditoriums, travel columns.
You know, that's what I want. I want to make a living doing what I like to do.
And what is that, Thomas?
Telling stories with my camera. Now, I want to put together films.
Then pursue it, my boy. That's what I did. I found what I was good at, and I made it my life's work.
Well, it's easy for you to say. You're Robert L. Ripley. I'm just a kid with his video camera.
You are not just anyone. I started out as just a kid who liked to draw. You are whoever you make yourself, young friend.
The war was over, and America was on the mend. Ripley pitched in, using his fame and notoriety to help the country get back on its feet again. He traveled around organizing charity events, speaking engagements, and other public appearances. The Ripley name was magic. People would come from far and wide to see this master of unusual ceremonies. From baseball games with disabled veterans, this one featured the broken wings against the flat tires, men who had lost arms and legs in the war, to big-time star-studded benefits. This pickup game, held at New York's Madison Square Garden, was a big hit. Believe it or not, that's the Sultan of SWAT, Babe Ruth, striking out for a good cause.
Mr. Ripley, we are experimenting with television. Won't you project into the homes of the nation some of your interesting Believe It or Not material? Today is a legal holiday, and almost everyone will be at home.
Always willing to try the latest technology, Ripley was one of the first to blaze a trail through television.
Live television was an adventure. Believe me, every time somebody went on the air, it was scary.
That was early television. You know, it was pretty crude then. It was really something.
Look at this screen. It's so small. What could you see on this?
Everything. It was perfect for my Believe It or Nots. I experimented with television shows before the war. There were only 3,500 sets in New York City at the time.
Really? Well, there's probably only 3,500 sets on one block today.
On one block? Amazing. If all those sets were stacked, one on top... Well, anyway, I went into television in a big way.
Were you like a star?
I made 13 television shows.
Wow, I wish I could have seen them.
You can.
NBC Television presents Believe It or Not. Greetings once again to the Believe It or Not television show.
The Ripley Media Express had changed gears, and, as always, Doug Storer had his hand on the throttle.
Well, that came just naturally. I mean, the same way that Douglas had gotten him through radio, he got him into television.
In its infancy, television was a wide-open, seat-of-the-pants operation. The fledgling industry was groping, searching for its own identity. Most of the early TV stars came out of radio. Robert Ripley, the most famous cartoonist in the world, king of newspapers, publishing, and radio, was a logical choice for this new medium.
It's very easy to do. Anyone can draw a picture. But I'm going to draw for you now. I'm still nervous. I draw for you now the strangest man I've ever seen.
Hardly the smoothest of entertainers, Ripley bulled his way through the live program, offering standard Believe It or Not fare. Drawings, oddities, and strange stories.
Horns actually grew out of this man's head.
And in a nod to show business, he even threw in some music.
That is very, very good. Very, very good indeed. And Lord and Lady Donegal, I want to thank you for being such very good sports and entertaining us with your unusual hobby.
Throughout the post-war years, he still found time to maintain the famous Ripley lifestyle. He was constantly on the go, attending Hollywood movie premieres, throwing parties, giving lectures, and seeing to the vast Believe It or Not multimedia empire. Besides his cartoon, which he continued to draw every morning, there were books, films, radio shows, television programs, merchandising, collecting, and travel. In the late 40s, Ripley was rambling once again, this time through Latin America. His passion for collecting hit a new high when he tried to buy a real, live volcano. In the mid-40s, Paracutin poked its angry head through a Mexican farmer's cornfield and quickly grew into a 1,500-foot mountain, belching flame, smoke, and lava. Unable to resist, Ripley tried to make arrangements to purchase this hot item. He wanted paracoutine, he said, because 1, as a boy he had always wanted a volcano. 2, it might fill a spiritual void. And 3, for the mineral rights. The Mexican government put a stop to his quest, citing some ancient law forbidding outside ownership of mountains or volcanoes. In these later years, Ripley's physical condition began to deteriorate. The nightlife, the travel, and his non-stop work schedule had him overweight and suffering from high blood pressure. One day in 1947, he took Douglas Storer aside.
Well, he said, I think we all need a vacation. He said, I'd like you and Hazel to be my guests, and we'll take a trip around the Orient.
Ever the producer, Doug Storer put Ripley to work on his vacation. The Believe It or Not radio show was still going strong. Storer thought a swing through the war-ravaged Pacific would score high ratings. This was to be Ripley's last trip. They stopped in Hawaii and broadcast live from Pearl Harbor at the site where the U.S. battleship Arizona went down.
We were able to climb on what is left of the buckled deck to pay homage to the over 1,000 young sailors whose bodies are still locked in her steel belly at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, one of the greatest tragedies ever recorded.
His tour got even grimmer at their next layover, Hiroshima. Ripley did a broadcast from Ground Zero, reporting on the aftermath of atomic destruction. After this sobering experience, he had high hopes for their final destination, China. Ripley was devastated by what he found. Shanghai was a teeming mass of confusion. His hated communists were about to change the course of history.
And of course, they were at the gates then. It was falling apart. The city was going downhill even then when we were there, because everybody was leaving. People realized that the communists were on the march, and it was just a matter of time.
Ripley returned home only to hear the news of China's fall to the Red Guard.
I was so startled by what he did. He grabbed me and he held me, and he's just in such an emotional state. And he said, Hazel, Hazel, he said, did you hear the news? He said, China has completely fallen. They've taken Shanghai, they've taken South China. He said, what will we do? What will we do?
So how come you were so unhappy?
China was the land of my soul. When I returned after the war, everything had changed. The people, the cities, the spirit of China. But nothing lasts forever, does it?
Well, you know, some things change, some things last forever.
A philosopher, are you, young Thomas?
Not really, but you know, some of the things you've done still exist, believe it or not.
Really? I wish I could see how.
Be careful what you ask for.
1993, and they still publish Ripley comics.
That's not all. There's museums all over the place.
Museums?
Ripley museums. There's one in Florida. I went to the one in Florida. Pretty cool. In fact, I even have footage of it. Here. Just look through the viewfinder. Put this in your ear to help you hear. Right in there.
I remember this place. I selected this site. It was going to be my first permanent auditorium. Say you don't have pictures of the inside, do you?
I most certainly do. Keep looking.
like the way you put this together, Thomas.
Really?
You have a good eye, Thomas.
Thanks.
Oh, yes.
By 1949, Ripley's health had gotten considerably worse. Only 55, he had the physical condition of a man 30 years older. He began suffering lapses on his television show.
Bob, you certainly have sketched an awful lot of fascinating people.
Yes, I have, and I think Peggy, one of the most fascinating I've ever seen. I saw just before the war On the Road to Mandalay in Burma.
Oh, yes. A young lady?
Yes.
Could I see? I'd love to, Bob.
I had a theory that that the television show was probably what killed him, because he would get so tense before the show that he was like a nervous wreck. And he'd get on and he never, I mean, getting in front of the camera, like a lot of people are very nervous, get butterflies and everything, and once they get in front of the camera, everything's all right, but he never became all right.
Douglas knew that Ripley was in bad shape. He knew he was physically in bad shape. Douglas had studied medicine himself, you know, and he was aware of that.
On Ripley's last show, he was doing a bit on the origin of taps. He momentarily blacked out, and his assistant was forced to cover. Douglas Storer approached him after the show.
He said, you've got to go into the hospital and get those checkups. He said, you're going to do it this week. Ripley said, no, I'm not going to do it this week. Maybe next week. He said, no. He said, Bob, he said, I don't care if we cancel the show. He said, I'm not going to have you do what you do tonight and make it permanent.
His best friend and fellow roustabout, Bugs Bear, gave Ripley a call at the hospital.
He said, Bugs, he said, I'm going to get home this weekend. I don't care what happens. He said, I'm going to get home. He'll be home. He said, come on. He said, we'll join me and we'll do something. And he hung up and he died. He just lay back on the pillows and died.
On May 27, 1949, at the age of 55, Robert Ripley died of a heart attack. After a memorial service in New York City, he was brought back to his hometown of Santa Rosa, California. The clever penman and creator of Believe It or Not was laid to rest in Oddfellows Cemetery.
So, that was it, huh?
I could not have been more surprised. I must say I had not planned to take that journey for a long, long time. But I did. No more Ripley. No more cartoons.
Well, actually, no, your cartoons are still around. You got a lot of imitators.
I'm not sure I like that.
Oh, no, it's not like that. I mean, there's only one Robert L. Ripley. I mean, no one can turn a phrase like you. No one looks at things the way you do. You're one of a kind, man.
Thank you for saying so, my friend. And thank you for coming to my world.
You know, every time I see something unbelievable, different, awesome, I'll think of you.
And you'll believe?
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Thomas, I wish you the most incredible, unbelievable, awesome journey through this life. And now, young friend, I'm afraid it's time for you to go back.
I'll miss you, Mr. Ripley.
And I you. Thomas, always remember that in this life, as wondrous and improbable as it is, all things are possible. All things.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. Ripley was here.
Believe it or not.